Every second airman was a walking corpse. That was the mathematical reality of the 8th Air Force. American commanders believed in the combat box, heavy bombers flying in tight, stepped formations. A wall of 50 caliber machine guns covering every angle. They called it a self-defending formation. It was a trap. Why did every second pilot fail to return home? The answer lay in the geometry of the formation. To maintain mutual defense, the B-17s had to fly straight. No maneuvering, no evasion. They became a steady, predictable target for the German batteries below. The carnage was systematic. Every fourth bomber never made it back to base. While the P-51 Mustangs eventually cleared the Luftwaffe from the sky, they were useless against the ground. The Germans protected their factories with rings of 88 and 105 mm guns. These batteries didn't just fire, they calculated. The radar didn't guess, it tracked. Black puffs of flak filled the sky, not by chance, but by coordinates. Despite the bristling guns and the escort fighters, only 20% of the bombs actually hit the target. The cost of that precision was absolute. German fire control systems synchronized hundreds of barrels onto a single point in space. German calculations left no room for guesswork. They hit the mark with mathematical precision. The air defense relied on the 88 mm flak gun. It was a masterpiece of ballistic engineering. High-velocity shells reached the bomber stream in seconds. When the fuse triggered, the shell didn't just explode. It disintegrated into a cloud of jagged steel. These shards traveled faster than the speed of sound. The B-17 was a giant of aluminum and steel, but its skin was only 0.04 inches thick. Did the armor offer any protection? None. Shrapnel sliced through the fuselage like a hot knife through wax. It severed steel control cables. It punctured self-sealing fuel tanks. It turned the cockpit into a pressurized slaughterhouse. Protocol demanded a steady platform. To drop bombs accurately, the pilot had to fly straight. No evasive maneuvers. No sudden turns. The formation became a massive, slow-moving target. Imagine the cockpit. Black puffs of smoke erupting directly ahead. The plane shudders from the shock waves. You watch the bomber to your left catch fire. It tilts. It slips out of formation. You look for parachutes in the rear view. Usually, there are none. The B-17 earned its nickname through sheer structural redundancy. It could fly with half a tail. It could stay level with 2 engines dead. Ground crews watched the horizon for these limping ghosts. Some returned with fuselage holes large enough to drive a jeep through. Flames trailed from the wing roots. The No. 4 engine was a torch of high-octane fuel. To pass through a wall of flak, American engineers built a flying porcupine. The B-17 Flying Fortress was an industrial answer to the German interceptors. It was a sledgehammer made of aluminum and steel. One machine gun was not enough, neither were 5. Why did a single bomber need 13 50 caliber barrels? Because in the thin air over Germany, survival was a matter of geometric coverage. The B-17G model became the definitive answer. It carried 13 heavy machine guns. Engineers crammed them into every possible angle. There were guns in the nose and a powered chin turret. 2 more sat in the dorsal position on top. 2 guarded the waist. 1 ball turret hung from the belly, while 2 more barrels pointed out from the tail. This configuration created overlapping fields of fire in every direction. When 13 50 caliber guns fired at once, the vibration shook the entire airframe. The roar drowned out the 4 Wright Cyclone engines. This system turned a lone bomber into a lethal sphere of lead, forcing enemy pilots into a crossfire from multiple positions. The All-American did not look like a bomber anymore. It looked like a photograph that should not exist. On February 1, 1943, Lieutenant Charles Cutforth pointed his camera out of a B-17 window and captured the impossible. A flying fortress, sliced nearly in half, still hanging in the sky. But 13 machine guns are useless against a 3-ton hammer moving at 300 miles per hour. The formation took off from Biskra, Algeria. Their target, German seaports in Tunisia. After dropping their payload, the B-17s turned for the 300-mile flight home. Two Messerschmitt fighters intercepted them in a high-speed head-on attack. The first German plummeted in flames. The second pilot, hit by American fire, lost control. The collision was a forensic nightmare. The Messerschmitt's wing acted like a surgical blade. It missed the waist gunner by inches. The impact tore through the fuselage, shredding aluminum and steel. The tail section snapped. It groaned under the aerodynamic pressure at 20,000 feet. The tail gunner was suddenly alone. He was trapped in a separate compartment, held to the rest of the plane by only two narrow strips of metal and bits of the floor. Below him was 4 miles of empty air. The damage report was a list of missing parts. 2 engines were dead. The left horizontal stabilizer was gone. The left elevator had vanished. The rudder and vertical fin were mangled. The pilots were effectively flying a ghost. The mechanical cables to the tail had snapped. But as the All-American drifted, a different system took over. How do you land a plane with severed control wires? The answer was hidden in the fuselage. While German bombers relied on direct mechanics, the B-17 carried a primitive computer. The autopilot was engaged during the impact. Instead of steel cables, it used electrical wiring and servo motors to move the remaining surfaces. The tail twisted. It swayed in the slipstream like a broken limb, but the servos held. The rest of the formation slowed down, forming a wall of steel around the wounded bomber. On January 3, 1943, the All-American didn't just stay airborne. It touched down safely with 0 serious injuries to the crew. Technicians later repaired the airframe, and the bomber returned to the front lines. The All-American survived because the machine refused to die. But for others, the miracle required a different kind of physics. Alan McGee was 20 years old. He was currently bolted into the ball turret of a B-17F nicknamed Snap, Crackle, Pop. The formation turned toward the U-boat pens at St. Nazaire. McGee began his 7th mission. The All-American returned, but the bomber dubbed Snap, Crackle, Pop became a steel trap. The sky over St. Nazaire turned into a wall of black smoke. Flak burst in clusters. Shrapnel sliced through the aluminum skin of the B-17. One engine died. Then a direct hit tore into the right wing. Alan McGee sat curled in the ball turret. It was a sphere of glass and metal barely 4 feet wide. How do you store a parachute in a space that small? The answer was simple: you don't. The rig sat inside the fuselage, out of reach. To survive, McGee had to follow a lethal choreography. Rotate the turret, align the hatch, climb up, strap on the silk, leap. The bomber spiraled. G-forces pinned him against the glass. The air inside the turret grew thick with the smell of scorched electrical wires and hydraulic fluid. McGee clawed his way back into the main cabin. Smoke blinded him. He reached for his parachute. The procedure was clear. The reality was a nightmare. Flak had found the pack first. The white silk was shredded. The harness was a mess of useless webbing. At 20,000 feet, the fuselage groaned and snapped. Centrifugal force threw McGee's body into the void. 4 miles of freezing void separated Alan McGee from the earth. The centrifugal force of the explosion acted like a catapult. It punched him through the jagged fuselage. No parachute, no oxygen, just a human body accelerating toward terminal velocity. Gravity took hold. At 20,000 feet, the air is thin and minus 50 degrees. McGee's lungs clawed for oxygen that wasn't there. His brain shut down. He fell as a dead weight, an unconscious stone dropping at 200 kilometers per hour. The glass roof of the St. Nazaire train station waited below. The impact was a scream of shattering crystal. McGee didn't hit the concrete. He hit the slanted glass panels of the station's skylight. One panel broke, then another. Each layer of reinforced glass stripped away his kinetic energy, acting as a brutal, transparent brake. He tumbled through the framework and landed on the stone floor. German guards found him there. He was a mess of broken anatomy. His right arm and leg were snapped. His face was a mask of blood from eye and nose injuries. Medics counted 28 separate shrapnel wounds across his body. The Germans were stunned. They didn't see a spy or a terrorist. They saw a miracle of physics. They rushed him to a hospital instead of a cell. McGee survived the surgeries and spent the next 18 months in a prisoner of war camp. Liberation came in 1945. McGee returned home and lived to the age of 84, a man who had outrun a 4-mile fall. But the archives of the 8th Air Force hold another name. Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran sat in the tail of a bomber named Ricky Tikki Tavi.